What motivates you to do your best work, and how do you get the most out of the people who work for you? These are the questions author Daniel Pink answers in his new book, Drive. Daniel, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure, Eric.
The book was really fascinating. I was surprised to learn that science for a long time has known what motivates people, and business just hasn't caught up to it. What is it?
Well, I mean, we have all kinds of motivations. We have a biological motivation. We drink when we're thirsty. We eat when we're hungry. We have a reward and punishment motivation. We respond exquisitely to rewards and punishments in our environment. But we also have another motivation, which is we do things because they're interesting. We do it because they're fun, because we get better at it, because they make a contribution. And what the research has shown is that relying entirely on that second drive, this very careful architecture of carrots and sticks, is very effective for simple tasks and for getting people to do things in the short term. But for complicated tasks, complex tasks, enduring motivation, they're inadequate. They don't work very well. They often backfire. And this intrinsic motivation, this third drive, is actually much more powerful.
Why does business so focus on external motivations and not intrinsic motivations?
Well, I think it's a few things. First is that that's how we've always done it, and they do work. That's the thing. I mean, if you want, if you wanted to motivate me to jump over this table, I have no intrinsic motivation to jump over this table. If you brought out a $100 bill and said, "Pink, jump over the table," I'm going to take a few steps back, jump over this table. Okay, but so they work. They work in the short term. They're also really easy. That's the other thing. Tapping someone's intrinsic motivation, their need for autonomy, their desire for mastery, that's much more complicated, much more difficult.
Talk to me about the three parts of intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, well, it's you know, in the workplace, I mean, people have to be paid enough. So if you're not being paid enough, you're not going to be motivated at all. If you're being treated unfairly, you're not going to be motivated at all. But if you look at the research, past a certain point, what really motivates people is the ability to direct their own lives, to have control over their time and over what they do. Mastery, there's just some research, Harvard Business Review just published research that showed that the biggest motivator at work is making progress. It isn't incentives, it's the feeling of making progress. And then finally, purpose. We want to do things that matter, that make a contribution, that are connected to some kind of broader purpose, something bigger than ourselves.
Something bigger than yourself, like altruism or
esteem
of your peers?
It could be. Well, listen, let's take Steve Jobs at Apple as an example. We tend to think that entrepreneurs are, pure profit seekers, but they're not. Entrepreneurs are usually miffed at something in the world and want to change it. And so Steve Jobs talked about in the early days of Apple, putting a dent in the universe. Okay? That's what all of us want to do in some small way. That could be, I mean, listen, if it's solving world hunger, that's cool by me, but it could be things like delighting a customer or coming up with a product that people didn't know that they were missing, or coming up with a process and doing it a little bit better and making a hospital work a little bit better.
We've seen from some recent Conference Board survey numbers that most Americans are not satisfied with their work, and in fact those numbers are getting worse. If you're in that boat, how do you motivate yourself?
It's very difficult, and those numbers, I think, were an alarm bell in the offices around America, because it was a double whammy. What people were complaining about, in part because of this recession and high unemployment levels, is that they were complaining about low pay, and they were complaining that work wasn't interesting. I mean, that is basically, if you wanted to have a perfect recipe for low motivation, that was it. And so I think that one important thing to do is to make sure that people are paid enough. If people are underpaid, you don't have a chance. Once you do that, I think we want to do interesting work, and we want to do it autonomously. And it's possible to sculpt jobs. Individuals can in some way shape their own work to be more autonomous. There's an interesting study that I write about of hospital janitors. Okay, that's not a job most of us would want, but there are hospital janitors who saw their job as simply coming in, sweeping the floor, and getting out. There were others who, because of some things in the environment and the way that the organization was structured, who had this even minimal ability to sculpt their job, so that they would go in when they cleaned a floor, talk to the patient. They would go in and maybe help a nurse every once in a while. Well, it turned out that those hospital janitors liked their jobs a heck of a lot more. They stuck around a lot longer. They moved up in the ranks of the organization. And so even, if we can take small steps to sculpt our jobs to make them a little bit more autonomous, to help us really make progress and get better at things, and to think about, okay, why am I here? We think about it at work. We spend, half of our waking hours at work. I mean, you want it to matter. You want it to be purposeful. And so look for some kind of purpose in your work as well.
Okay. Now suppose I'm managing people.
Yeah.
Can you give me some tips on how to get them motivated?
Well, there are all kinds of really interesting examples that seem to be radical. I mean, there's a company called Atlassian that does something called a FedEx Day, where it's a software company, and they say to their developers, here's a day, for the next 24 hours, work on whatever you want. Do whatever you want, do it the way you want, do it with whoever you want. And it turns out that that one day of intense autonomy has produced, fixes for existing software, new ideas for products that would never otherwise have emerged. Part of it is like if you're a manager, it's so interesting. We tend to have this in business, this notion, especially managers, that people, if they're left alone, they're basically lumps, and they would never do anything. So you've got to have that stick waiting for them, or you've got to have that carrot out in front of them. That's how people are. They're inert lumps. Now, what's curious is that no manager ever believes this about him or herself. Okay? They only believe it about other people. But if you say, well, maybe people are kind of like me. Maybe they actually want to do something that matters. Maybe they want to do good work. Then if you say, well, maybe I should get out of their way a little bit more, and the science shows that. Maybe I should recognize that making progress is really important in job satisfaction. So what I can do as a manager is help people make that progress or recognize that progress when it's made. And maybe, I think most important for a manager, is maybe I can explain what we're doing and infuse it with some sense of purpose. If people are working their butts off, as many people are right now in this economy, long days and hard work and taking other kinds of assignments, a manager can come in and say, listen, here's what's going on. Here's how it contributes to what we're doing. Here's why what you're doing is important. And the interesting thing about that is all these mechanisms that I'm talking about is they're free. It's, we're not talking about, heavy investments in more compensation or heavy investments in more benefits. Those are all good, but these, in a recession, we're kind of out of carrots. And so I think managers can actually, the great scientific revelation, Eric, in this research is that human beings aren't horses.
Yes. Yes. All right.
Stop the presses. That's the breakthrough news.
Good. All right. So we don't need monetary carrots. We need autonomy carrots and motivation carrots and purposefulness.
Well, we need money. We need to have if you're not getting enough money, this conversation's over. But once you get that, and holding out an additional promise of money is very motivating for people. But it doesn't necessarily motivate them to do the right things. It can motivate people to cheat. They're also terrible for creative tasks. If you hold out, if you say, hey, I want you to come up with a creative idea, and if you do, I'll give you $10,000, you've gotten my attention, okay? But what you've done, you've gotten my attention, you focused it on that $10,000. And creativity doesn't require that kind of laser beam focus. It requires looking around, a broader way of thinking. And so the evidence, it's not even a close call in behavioral science that these if-then rewards, if you do this, then you get that, they're terrible for creative tasks. They simply don't work.
All right. And in a world in which creative tasks are really where the future lies.
Where most of us are doing that kind of work. What we have is we have this carrot and stick motivational system. It's kind of like a technology that has outlived its usefulness. We need to kind of update what we're doing.
All right, good. Time for Motivation 3.0?
Yeah.
All right, Daniel, this is very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
And thanks for watching.